and welcome to the first in a short series of interviews for the Global Fintech Festival in India. My name is Simon Hardie. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Findexable. You may have seen us in the news or in the press. If you're in the fintech industry, we're launching next week, actually, a global index and ranking of fintech cities and a global ranking of fintech companies. So we hope that you'll visit us at findexable.com to come and see what we've been working on over the last year. It's no small task. I'm delighted today to welcome Mr. Navin Surya at the Fintech Convergence Council. We're going to talk a little bit today about the fintech scene across India, his role, and obviously the perspective of the council in terms of the development, ongoing development of fintech across India, and the opportunities for the future, particularly given quite a challenging commercial climate globally. Navin, over to you. Perhaps you just give a brief introduction about who you are and what you're doing, and welcome today.
Yeah. So Simon, thanks for inviting me, and great work. I think amazing data, a lot of interesting insight for us as well. Briefly about myself, I play actually multiple roles today. I'm an active fintechs and tech startup investors. I'm a non-executive industry chair for Fintech Convergence Council, which is India's fintech association. I've also been non-executive chairman emeritus for Payment Council of India, which I founded 12 years back and chaired it for over 10 years. I also play bit role of directors and advisors in multiple companies. Of course, I have been India's first digital wallet company CEO, founder, which I exited about 2.5 years back. And that's what I briefly do, and looking forward to interact with the fintech community a lot more.
Thank you very much. Well, let's start at the top, at the beginning, if you like. Navin, so tell us a little bit about the Convergence Council. It sounds a little bit like there's a kind of regulatory dimension to what you're doing, but tell us about the work of the council and why it was needed.
Yeah. So in India, it's a unique situation. We actually have two bodies which work very closely. The first one we set up about 12 years back, which was Payment Council of India, which was looking at all the digital payment, because that was the only fintech with which the whole fintech movement started. And as I said, I was running one of the first Indian digital payments fintechs at that time. So it needed some industry body to drive the growth in the industry for non-banks, especially since they were not represented, especially to government, to regulators, and also work within the community as a team to see that what are the business opportunities that we can all grow. It has been a complete new area. It's been a kind of quite an interesting challenge. The same thing as we kind of progress in digital payment, we saw the same thing and same opportunity with other fintech areas, be it lending, be it insurtech, be it wealth tech, and all other areas surrounding in terms of AI, ML, and other tech related stuff, including blockchain. So we set up another council, which is about 2 years old, but we had some of the members already with us working, right from large ones like Policy Bazaar, Bank Bazaars, and many such similar entities. So basically, again, the focus remains same, that how do we drive the growth the way Indian digital payment industry is well known now across the globe? How do we get rest of the fintech industry also their rightful place in the world, let's say in the whole world map? And we're working with regulators, with governments, a lot of work around policy, growth, business issues, social issues, and also the overall security and a kind of environment where this actually becomes the answer to our inclusion in the country.
Thank you very much for that, Navin. I'm interested in your particular choice of title. I mean, most associations, it's fintech association or development agency or whatever it might be. The choice of the word convergence, I think, is interesting. Certainly from our point of view, we can certainly see that fintech is different to traditional financial services, but the challenge remains, of course, of how one defines fintech. So from your point of view, what was the purpose of talking about convergence, and how are you coming at a definition or trying to define what fintech is or is not?
So two reasons. One is a personal, because in 2000, when I started my entrepreneurial journey, I kind of literally wrote a white paper for next 20 years, which was like a scale from starting of the digital convergence, where information, communication, and entertainment converge, to a channel convergence, which was more of a sales channel convergence, right from corporate to kind of intermediary channels and everything else, both physical, digital, to a payment convergence, and eventually full-scale financial services convergence and converging economy situation. So that was kind of a stages that I've personally kind of believed, and then probably coined some sort of a white paper for myself as a roadmap into the future. And when we started fintech, we already had payments. We already had so unlike payments in a fintech, we have already many bodies who are working on some specific areas. For an example, for banks, there is a very large association called Indian Bank Association. For mutual funds, you have MFI, which does a lot of work. For insurance, they have come to other SRO bodies. So what we realize is that our job is not necessarily to get into day-to-day issues of each of these sectors, but we need to act as a catalyst between all these industries. Wherever there is a digital layer that is required. So any issue which is digital across the industry, which is where fintechs come in, actually we will get involved. And by that definition, we actually started collaborating with all the existing incumbent associations, players. At the same time, we said that while we do all these work, but a lot of these traditional bodies have no clue about what's happening on a technology side and how it can be adapted. The journeys are very different, experiences are very different. How do you really help them? So we said that our expertise is, having done it in Payment Council, we thought, why can't we act as a convergence platform? Similarly, there were a lot of hubs which were at the state level. They were helping startups and the investors and the existing large players work with them. So we said that we will create a layer which is a agnostic horizontal layer across the existing ecosystem. And our focus will remain on the digital layer. Wherever there are issues across the industry, we will help solve them. To give you an example, the first problem we solved was getting RBI to agree to do a video KYC, which took about 2 years' time to work and sit with them and see how it will work. A lot of players supported, even RBI openly helped us to see how it can work, what can be launched as a version O. And then we kind of got it live about 6 months back. At least banks today can do full video-based KYC for the customers onboarding. So like this, there are many initiatives which are on the digital side. We thought that we need to converge all those efforts on a one platform. So it also helps to have a one single converged voice when you go and talk to the regulators, policymakers, and government.
And how are you measuring success, of the organisation? Is it in the terms of the progress that fintech as a whole is making, or is it simply your membership of your organisation, dialogues with regulators?
See, we are a bunch of people who are always impact driven. We always look at the overall industry growth, be it in terms of number of players, be it in terms of the growth in the sectors itself, that how the businesses are growing, and be it, of course, the number of players. So it's been always impact focused. It's not as much. So again, the core entity, which is Internet and Mobile Association, which we again use the same legal entity, where we have rest of the digital ecosystem already there. So that's again an advantage that if you have to work with tech fins, they're also available as the same platform. So our focus, this whole entity is again not for profit. So the focus is not as much on the membership and the revenue. Of course, we want to be a sustainable entity so that we are there for longer term. Obviously, this entity is already about 18 years old. So that way it's already there, but the focus is very clearly the impact on the outcomes rather than looking at the number of the members or the fee revenue that we get. And by the way, most of us work voluntary. There's no fee that we charge or no salary we draw.
Nice. And how many members, just out of interest, how many members do you have currently, and what sort of activities do you engage in to advocate for and promote fintech nationally or even internationally to other regions?
So I think almost 150 plus members, and these 150 out of 3,000 ecosystem would look small number. But if you look at in terms of their impact and the business that they do, probably they will account for more than 90% of the business done by fintechs in the country. What we do, because there are a lot of startups who are very small, they probably don't need the full scale help from the association. We actually work with them through the local hubs, incubation centers. So we actually have a lot of collaborative models with those hubs, which are actually looking at a very early stage startups, and we try and collate the matters through them and then work with them. Now, the areas of work, of course, remains the policy side. We do a lot of research work. We work very closely on various committees. Whenever new laws are to be done, whenever the rules needs to be changed to facilitate a fintech related matters. And these are decided by each of the business segments that what are the current core issues. And basis that we arrive at a right solution, we kind of dialogue and discuss with the regulators. So that's one area of work. The second, of course, is the awareness and so there are regular roundtables and the events that we do to continuously create not just the global awareness about what is happening in India, but also local between the players. So this continuous knowledge dissemination that's happened. It, of course, traditionally has been more local as far as payment is concerned, and the fintech being more global phenomena. For last 2 years, our continuous attempt has been to kind of reach out and create this kind of a platform plugged into more global platforms. So that's what the attempt that we are doing. Lastly, of course, we kind of do a lot of interesting you could say, is kind of innovative business model where we go and actually directly work with the sandbox and proposes these are the new models that can be tried. So focus is always business growth, innovation, but with the right policy and regulation. The last piece, nobody looks at it. No. And that's where we kind of our expertise, and we try and marry all these three.
Thank you for that. Well, I agree on the regulation point, and I want to touch on that, perhaps a little later in the conversation. Let's move to the India fintech landscape as a whole and the ecosystem that's developing there. As we said, shortly before we started the interview, we launched at the end of last year an algorithm to track, map, monitor fintech activity at a global level, across cities, across countries. What was incredibly interesting was the expectation. Our guess was that China would do the best in terms of big emerging markets when it comes to fintech activity. Actually, it was India that came out top, and I mean top from quite a high level perspective, in the sense that when you look at the 100 biggest fintech ecosystems worldwide, there were 7 Indian hubs relative to compared to just 6 in China. I wonder, what does that say to you about India's fintech activity, and how has that come about? Because the China story is something that everybody is aware of, for obvious reasons, Alibaba, WePay and WeChat Pay and so on. But the India story is perhaps less well known. So what are the dynamics in India that are leading to to that success, I suppose one might call it, and what's happening in India's fintech ecosystem?
So there's one more data that you said, so let me also talk about that. That when you look at the traditional financial services hub or institutions hub, India does not figure out amongst the top 20 at least, right? So these are quite starkly different. And actually, that's where the answer lies. So fundamentally, India financial services penetration, if you look at across the country, I mean, it's known fact that India is the second largest market in terms of number of consumers.
Yes.
But when you look at the penetration of current financial services in that population, banking is the only thing which is actually well penetrated now. I mean, still not at the peak, but still about 50% plus of the adult population at the highest. But every other services you take, the next one, which is probably still is in double digit, is the retail digital payment, which has happened largely in last 10 years from single digit to 2 digit. So it's still over at 15%, so 85% plus is still in physical cash. But you talk about any other services, insurance, you take combination of general insurance, life insurance, and various other host of products, the penetration will be roughly around 2.5 to 3%. You take the same thing for securities, trading, investment, wealth. I think you're talking about minuscule number of 2.5%. It clearly tells that the penetration is so low, and the growth potential for anybody who gets the solutions right and who has the ability to really offer the right product to that customer is immense. And then actually, this is where China comes in. You've seen what has happened in China in last 2 decades. And probably we are somewhere in that first decade of that 2 decade. So there is an opportunity, and a huge opportunity, and a possibility that in next decade or so, you could create multiple of those very large fintech institution out of India. This is the sheer growth possible in the market. Also, it goes to a lot of things that has happened over a decade. If you see, there are 4 layers that has been built in India. It started with the telecom and internet, which is actually now more or less fully penetrated to the right audience who has the ability to do something. So that was like a first layer that is automatically, that took time, but now finally it's in place, especially with in last few years or so with Geos coming in. It's a huge effort that they have put in, and it's happened. On top of that, the moment we added the identity layer, which is India's UIDA or Aadhaar, that solved a lot of problem about KYC for a lot of these people. Because the moment you enter financial services, you don't have an ID, you can't get a service. So you solve that. Everybody today, literally, I think 99% of population has ID, and it's a digital form. It can be used digitally, and that's the best available in the country, or rather actually at the global level. Now, on top of that, we built in last about less than a decade, in fact, a world-class, I think, amazing payment rails, right from IMPS to UPI, and they are actually top of the world and top of the class. I think probably one of the pioneering countries in the fast payments with those. So you suddenly have an ability to move money across all the accounts, all type of instruments on a real-time basis. And potentially now that solution is going actually to world. So having built that, and then there are 2 more pieces that are getting built. One is the data layer, and then eventually a distribution layer. So those are also getting in place. If you look at across the globe, you would find probably maybe 1 or 2 countries or lesser where you have all these layers in fully digital form, nothing analog. And they're completely built anew, which means they're built with modern today's cutting edge technology.
Yes.
And they're all tested at scale because, I mean, we have seen the numbers even of one of the smallest of the fintechs here will have a number in any developed countries, which will actually be a mid-size or a matured company. So because of it's tested at scale, it's working at a cost which is fraction of across the globe. So if you put all of this together, which says that we are finding a solution which is not necessarily only for India if we get it right here, which is the most difficult part. Because everybody complains India is not an easy market to work with for a variety of reasons. But if you get it right here, your potential to take it global in next decade or so is very high. Yes. And that's what is actually reflecting in your index, that there are multiple cities in India where the government, local, and at least the central, they're continuously giving thrust to more and more such services to come up.
Yeah, thank you for that, Navin. I mean, as you said, you talked about, in the index you can see the kind of cities that people will have heard of, the New Delhis, the Bangalores, and the Mumbais, of course. Bangalore, very famous for, a very large, the home, I suppose, of Indian technology. People know about those places, but where are some of the emerging hubs, and also what are some of the fintech companies that you're seeing that are coming up and would be sensible to look at, or would be exciting to watch, bearing in mind that some investors are going to be at this event watching these videos and so on. What would you highlight to them?
So of course, I think Mumbai, Delhi, and Bangalore remains the top of the chart for a variety of reasons in terms of infrastructure, etc., etc. But there are some additional 2-3 cities which are actually doing up very well. So again, Gurgaon, if it is not included in Delhi, that's doing very well. Jaipur, which is in Rajasthan, again is upcoming. There's a small finance bank, which is the largest, one of the best, very fast growing. They're doing very well, AU Finance. So again, similarly, you have Telangana kind of combination, which is coming up very, very well. There are a few places in Karnataka beyond Bangalore which are being developed. There's a gift city being developed in Gujarat purely for innovations in tech, and which may have even probably more flexible rules to kind of support innovative models. So it's a variety depending on your objectives. You have enough choice in India. And one more thing that we like about India, which is a bit different, is that it's always a diverse population. You could have a population set representing best of the developed world, yes, to a population which you could actually look at the most struggling, underdeveloped country. So you could actually have as diverse set of the population depending on how you select your geography and depending on your product, and you could actually take to those additional geographies later. So it gives you a choice to try all kind of customer segments and in a diverse way. And I think we're good in combining and integrating all of them.
That's exciting, absolutely. The diversity is certainly of interest to us as we seek to kind of map what's happening in terms of financial innovation. That being said, then, where would which sort of segments do you think are perhaps the biggest opportunities, either by volume or sort of potential market size? I mean, I can tell you, for example, that certainly in Western Europe and the US and North America, the focus when it comes to fintech at the moment is very much towards the SME side of things, not just because of the opportunity, but also because of the climate and obviously the government incentives or imperative to try and help businesses weather the storm of the pandemic. What would you say are the kind of big innovation or service, provision of financial service opportunities in India at the moment?
So actually, the answer is every financial services. But I mean, what you will deliver.
You were going to say that.
and I'm not joking. I mean, it's a fact. If you go to traditional banking, which is well penetrated, but most of the large banks still are not ready to kind of compete digitally. So there are enough companies who are trying to create a neo-banking or open banking model to help them digitize most of the services and actually make them as agile to compete with tech fins or fintechs, which are going to compete directly. So there's a huge scope even within that developed segment. And from there, you move to payments, which is under-penetrated after that. Within that, what you call SME, we call actually one level down called MSME. It's like individual entrepreneur,
entrepreneurs.
Yeah, self-employed. So all those guys, I think they are like a very interesting layer, very large in number, but highly underserved.
Yeah.
create solution for them, not just in payments, but lending, some insurance like health, medical. The COVID is actually pretty hard, already selling pretty well, and actually
Are
very
you?
good.
Would you be able to name any companies that are serving those segments which are doing
Yeah,
particularly
there are a lot
well?
of companies. There's a fintech company, Discovery, which launched this product for COVID. There's Echo, which is a platform integrating a lot of these insurance companies and products, completely digital products. So there are many companies which are actually coming up, bringing an innovation. But there is a potential within digital payments, lending, currently under pressure. But again, the demand is all-time high because of the current situation in the market, the pressure, especially I'm a big fan of MSME segment, which will still do well if you do your lending right. Of course, InsurTech, WealthTech, we are still at an early stage, but interestingly, that's a business which had hardly seen any impact. That continues to grow. While the indexes may be going up and down through roller coaster, but the overall volumes, etc., continue to grow.
Very nice. Let's talk a little bit then about regulation. We have to talk about that, of course. You mentioned that penetration, particularly in some segments of financial services, is very low. Of course, the challenge with any innovation, particularly a financial innovation, is always this balance between driving adoption, but also ultimately what methods of payment or financial management are accepted. So that's certainly one dynamic when it comes to opportunities, which is difficult to navigate for any new entrant, isn't it? And then in India, of course, you've had the experience of this demonetization program a couple of years ago, which forced people to suddenly start using, it forced consumer behavior change, I suppose, by making people have to use different electronic means of payment. So how do you view the regulatory environment, and what lessons have been learned from that demonetization from the fintech community?
Yeah. So regulatory environment is kind of a mix here. There are some hugely positive areas, like you don't have a statewide licensing in a lot of products. You get a license process once with any of the regulators, you're through, and you could actually do business across the country. So that's on the plus side. The challenge side is that if you're a fintech and if you're a diversified or integrated fintech delivering multiple services, which seems to be more India model considering the ticketing size, the ticket sizes are low and the economics is usually tight. So if you have to go there, you end up dealing with multiple regulators, because there are three very large regulators. Of course, there are about 5, 6, but three very large ones. Securities, where there's SEBI, all the payments and banking, there's RBI, and then you have IRDA, which is for insurance. And there are times when, while fundamentally they're all looking at some of the common rules like PMLA, etc., but fundamentally there could be some different approaches. So you have to actually deal with them differently. There could be kind of a conflict areas between them or you to manage them. So that kind of at a very macro level, sometimes the challenges. But good part is that all these regulators have built a very constructive discussion-led process. What they do well is that they continue the dialogues between all of them, and that's what we have seen firsthand with RBI quite a lot in my last 10+ years. Of course, we see the same thing with SEBI, and now it's happening at IRDA. Plus, the sandbox has come in, and all three regulators. So it's a consultative process. It does take some time, that you don't get something that has happened today that you can simply do without regulatory approvals. Like some countries allow innovation to be tested, reach some scale, and then regulate. In India, I think the preference is, considering the kind of type of consumers that we have, who could actually be shortchanged, especially in middle and the bottom of the segment. The regulator prefers that you run past at least the risk side of the business propositions with them and then take approval. They may give you slightly conservative approvals, but if you prove that generally, fundamentally, there's nothing wrong with it, then they start opening it up. So it works in a very different direction, where most other countries developed, it will be like allow, fire, kind of then aim and then fire again. Here it's like, no, we have to kind of aim, then fire, and then readjust. Yes. So that's how it works. But on the whole, I think things have changed quite a lot. There is also now a committee called FSLRC, which is combination of all three regulators, and then there are some additional ministry people who look at common issues, who look at sensitive fintech-related issues. So we're seeing that also dynamically changing. And no industry is ever happy with regulator, and no regulator is ever happy with industry. So it's that love-hate relationship everywhere. But good part is organizations like ours, which are associations, they act as a very important bridge to keep that balance on the both sides and a kind of bridge between both sides. So that's working well. And I think we have done very well in many areas because of that.
Excellent, exciting stuff. You mentioned open banking earlier in the conversation. Funnily enough, we ran a session, a live conversation yesterday with a group of regulators and some academics about open banking. One of them in particular was the UK CMA, which is obviously the organisation that created open banking rules for Britain, and then since then obviously the move for open banking and along with PSD2 has sort of taken off, and there's some 50 odd countries I think now that are looking at it. What progress has been made in India? What was very interesting, I would say, on the conversation yesterday, of course, is that some of the bigger, when you look at open banking success stories at the level of fintech company success, the bigger successes are actually in places that either don't have the rules or date from a time before open banking and PSD2 was implemented. Thinking obviously about Plaid in the US, the platforms in China, and the likes of So Forth and Swish in Northern Europe. So what direction do you think India will take when it comes to open banking?
So as per our definition, we kind of define open banking more as interoperable banking for a customer across different banks through a digital layer. I would say that's very limited progress that has been made. While RBI has put it in their vision document, they want it to happen, and then there are still not rules like in Europe that are already in place. So that's a kind of early stage, but that is what is likely to happen because there is an intent. On the other hand, we are seeing quite a bit of a progress on neo-banking, which we see a digital layer of a distribution or a digital layer of engagement with the customers for all the bank customers, or let's say for existing banks. There we are seeing considerable, very high progress, very good attention, and that seems as a very interesting area and a quite scaling up area. So that's something which we are seeing. That probably next one would be the open banking. Somewhere we've yet not created a virtual banking license in India yet, but we do have two licenses which are not exactly equivalent to digital banking or a virtual banking licenses, but are differentiated license like Payments Bank and Small Finance Bank, which do provide you a little bit of a balance between a traditional universal bank license that we say, which is like everything allowed, but a lot more regulations, versus you have some constrained offering, but you still are allowed a lot more flexibilities. But you still have to have a balance between physical and digital infrastructure and the service points. So that's something which is under discussion. But we expect that also to come soon within some of these framework. So we see that these are all evolving areas, and this is where the growth will happen. So we're seeing a lot of companies currently working with regulators and banks to gradually enter these areas.
Thank you. I mean, we'll draw this interview to a close after this next question, I think. But it does sound that you're very broadly, very optimistic about fintech across India as a whole, and some of the opportunities that you've talked about there. Certainly the breadth of opportunities sounds very, it's clearly a dynamic, exciting market and place to be. Notwithstanding that, of course, we're in the midst of a global health crisis. COVID-19 is going to impact business as a whole, and of course for startup companies that are dependent on capital and funding, it's going to present a different funding perspective in terms of the runway to accessing finance. What do you think is going to be, or what is, I would say actually, what is the impact of the pandemic so far on fintech innovation and investment in India, and going into next year, what do you see? What's the picture likely to look like?
So we are seeing very positive impact on all the companies which are doing all processes digital or enabling an existing player to digitize that process. There's a huge demand every day. And actually, if I compare, while we had a demonetization lessons and experience, while it grew the business volumes and the kind of growth, everything, but the readiness of the customer to adapt to digital currently is probably 5x more than what it was. So in that sense, actually, it could have even more meaningful impact for the entire fintech sector across the products. So in that sense, it is very positive. Challenge remains, like you rightly said, that on the funding side, while the Indian funding to the fintechs is continuously happening, but at the same time, we're seeing quite a cautious approach, especially in the VC side. So angels continue to do kind of lot many investment because they're highly bullish that any new idea can actually easily fit in, and their model is anyways to invest in more companies, even few workforce. VC being the next stage, I think they are trying to keep majority of their money because they've already placed the bets on some of the larger fintechs. So while they are not averse to do investment, but their focus is a lot more on reserving money for the existing players that they have backed for, so that they want to see them through and then probably they want them to leverage this time to also do a lot of M&A activities, consolidation activities, probably which is a good time for them to actually drive and create more wealth and value for their own companies. So that's how I see it. I think for a year or so, it will remain a little bit of uncertainty. So I always advise fintechs to find their survival strategy first, and then gradually build the best product, because you also don't need to be in a hurry. As you do it, if you survive through this next 12-month period, you actually are going to see a huge kind of rocket growth that will actually take you to a very different level. And if you could just make through that, you're going to be one of the most valuable companies, not just in India, but across the globe.
Yes.
And I think in a second year or so, we are going to see a lot more funding that is happening. Even if I leave this current 6-month period, India was already growing almost 100% year on year on FDI. So kind of 2 billion became 4 billion just in a matter of 1 year in 2019 from 18. This year, obviously, it's a mixed bucket, but by end of the year, we probably be even higher than that. And hopefully next year, I could see 3 to 4x jump, actually, not just 2.
Yes, I mean, that's certainly, that investment picture is certainly something very similar to what we've been hearing from other markets and other regions. I imagine from the perspective of the fintech companies themselves also that the focus strategically, at least for the time being, has shifted over to sort of, as you said, survival and ultimately profitability over a play for scale. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah. And of course, it depends on the type of entity, which stage of business you are, but generally, yes, that.
Yeah. Very good. Well, Navin, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you very much for joining us today. And we look forward to, at some point, hopefully meeting you in person in future.
Thank you very much. And I just hope that you and many other of your audience will join us for Global Fintech Festival on 22nd.
Absolutely, we hope so.